A cowboy took in his neighbor's abandoned mail-order bride and discovered true love in his cabin. Jacob lived on the edge of the prairie, in a small, sturdy cabin that had been built by his own hands. The wooden walls were rough but strong, and the roof, though simple, kept out the rain and snow. Jacob had lived alone for years, ever since his parents passed away. Life on the prairie was hard, and it demanded a man who could take care of himself. Jacob was that man. He woke at dawn every day, fed the cattle, checked the fences, and worked until the sun dipped behind the hills. Evenings were quiet, filled with the crackling of the fireplace and the soft whistle of the wind outside. He was content in his solitude, though he sometimes wondered what it would be like to share his life with someone else. One chilly morning, Jacob was mending a broken fence near the edge of his property when he heard the sound of hooves approaching. A rider came into view, riding fast and looking worried. It was his neighbor, a kind but elderly man who had lived in the area for many years. Jacob recognized the urgency in his eyes immediately. "Jacob," the neighbor called as he pulled up, dismounting quickly. "I need your help. It's about Clara." Jacob straightened, wiping the sweat and dust from his hands. "What happened?" he asked, curiosity and concern mixing in his voice. "She's been abandoned," the neighbor said. "The man who was supposed to marry her never showed up. She's alone and scared. I can't take her in, and I was hoping you might." Jacob frowned slightly. He had heard of mail-order brides before, young women traveling far from home to marry men they had never met. It was a risky business, and not everyone succeeded in finding happiness this way. But hearing that a young woman had been abandoned stirred something in him, a mixture of responsibility and compassion. He had always been a man of action when someone needed help. I can take her in," Jacob said slowly. "I have room in my cabin. It's small, but she'll be safe there." The neighbor nodded gratefully, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Jacob. I didn't know who else to ask." By the time Jacob returned to his cabin, he was already thinking about what it would mean to have someone else living with him. He was a private man. He liked his routines. He liked the quiet. But he also knew that life was more than solitude, and he hoped he could provide a safe place for Clara. That afternoon, a small wagon approached, and a young woman stepped down. She carried a modest trunk, her dress plain but neat, her hair tied simply behind her head. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of fear, uncertainty, and curiosity. She was Clara. Jacob met her at the door. "You must be Clara," he said, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm Jacob. You'll be safe here." Clara nodded, her hands gripping the trunk tightly. She tried to smile, but it faltered. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft. I didn't know where else to go." Jacob helped her bring the trunk inside. The cabin was small but warm. A fire burned in the hearth, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with the scent of the earth outside. It was simple, but it was a home. "Make yourself comfortable," Jacob said. "You can stay as long as you need." Clara looked around, taking in the modest furnishings. A table, a couple of chairs, a small bed tucked in the corner, and shelves lined with a few dishes and supplies. She felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she would be safe here. In the first few days, life was quiet but awkward. Clara tried not to intrude, keeping to herself and learning the rhythms of cabin life. She helped with small chores, sweeping the floor, fetching water from the well, and preparing simple meals. Jacob was patient, showing her the ways of the prairie, how to tend the fire, how to care for the animals, and how to repair the fences. They didn't speak much at first. Jacob was used to silence, and Clara was wary of overstepping. But little by little, the quiet moments between them became comfortable. She would hum softly while working in the kitchen, and Jacob found himself listening, appreciating the gentle sound that filled the cabin. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jacob and Clara sat outside on the porch, watching the cattle graze in the fading light. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, wild and untamed. Jacob noticed how the wind caught Clara's hair, making it glow in the last rays of the sun. She looked peaceful, almost at ease, and for a moment Jacob felt a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known before. "Do you miss home?" he asked, gently, not wanting to pry but wanting to understand her better. Clara nodded, her gaze distant. "Yes," she said softly. "Sometimes I think about my family and the life I left behind, but I also think that maybe this was meant to be. Maybe I was supposed to end up somewhere like this." Jacob didn't respond immediately. He understood too well the feeling of being alone and having to make your own life. He knew that sometimes life's plans were not as clear as one would hope. Days turned into weeks, and Clara began to settle into the cabin life. She learned to milk the cows, gather eggs, and chop wood efficiently. Jacob noticed her resilience and determination. She didn't complain, even when the tasks were hard or the weather was harsh. He admired that strength, though he kept it to himself. At the same time, Clara noticed Jacob's quiet kindness. He was patient, never raising his voice, always willing to teach without judgment. He had a gentle way of showing that he cared, through actions rather than words. She felt safe around him, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered, and the wind howled across the prairie. Jacob hurried to secure the animals and make sure the cabin was safe. Clara worked alongside him, tying down supplies and bringing in firewood. They moved quickly but efficiently, helping each other without speaking much. When the storm finally passed, the sky cleared, revealing a rainbow arching across the horizon. They stood together on the porch, watching it in silence. Jacob felt a strange sense of contentment. For all the difficulties, for all the loneliness of his past, this moment felt right. Clara looked at him and smiled faintly, and he realized he had come to care for her deeply, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Nights in the cabin were quiet, but not lonely. They shared meals and conversations, discovering small things about each other. The foods they liked, the stories of their childhoods, the dreams they harbored quietly. They laughed at small mishaps and celebrated little victories, like fixing a broken fence or successfully baking bread. Jacob began to notice that he looked forward to her presence. He would feel a pang of disappointment when she went out to gather water or feed the animals. Clara, too, found herself thinking about Jacob when he wasn't around, admiring the way he worked hard without complaint, the way he treated the land and the animals with respect, the quiet strength he carried in his every action. Despite the growing closeness, there was an unspoken tension. Both of them were cautious, unsure if these feelings were appropriate. Clara was still technically a bride-to-be for another man, even if he had abandoned her. Jacob had never thought of himself as someone who would fall for a mail-order bride. Yet, the connection between them was undeniable, forming slowly through shared work, shared meals, and shared silence. One evening, as the fire crackled and the stars sparkled outside, Clara spoke quietly. "Jacob, I don't know what the future holds, but I'm grateful for this, grateful for your kindness." Jacob nodded, feeling the weight of his own emotions. "Clara, you don't need to worry. You'll be safe here, and I'll make sure you're taken care of." She smiled softly, and for the first time, Jacob felt that maybe life had given him a chance at something more than solitude. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected turn of events, taking in a stranger, offering her safety, was the beginning of something that could change both their lives forever. The prairie outside was vast and untamed, much like their lives. But inside the cabin, warmth and hope had taken root. And as Jacob watched Clara settle into the small room that would be hers, he realized that sometimes life's unexpected responsibilities could lead to the most unexpected blessings. Days turned into weeks, and life in the cabin began to settle into a rhythm. Jacob and Clara had grown used to each other's presence, though the feeling between them was still tentative, like a small flame that had yet to grow. The prairie outside stretched endlessly, wild and beautiful, but inside the cabin, a quiet companionship was forming. Clara had begun to understand the demands of life on the prairie. She could milk the cows without spilling the milk, gather eggs from the coop without startling the hens, and even chop wood with surprising accuracy. She worked alongside Jacob, carrying out each task with a mixture of determination and grace. Jacob, in turn, taught her carefully, never rushing, never scolding. He showed her how to patch a fence, how to start a fire in the hearth without filling the room with smoke, and how to prepare meals with the simple ingredients they had. At first, their conversations were brief and practical, limited to instructions or questions about daily chores. But slowly, as they spent more time together, they began to share stories. Clara would speak of her childhood home far away, of the family she missed, and the friends she had left behind. She spoke of her hopes for a life filled with kindness and safety, of dreams she hadn't dared to share with anyone. Jacob listened quietly, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply nodding. He didn't speak much of his past, but Clara began to sense the weight of experiences he had carried alone. One afternoon, after a long morning of repairing a broken section of the fence, they paused to rest. The sun was high in the sky, warming the earth, and the prairie seemed to stretch forever in every direction. Jacob handed Clara a water flask, and she accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't know I could manage so much work." Jacob shook his head, smiling faintly. "You're stronger than you think, it's just a matter of learning." Clara looked at him, noticing the lines in his face, the quiet determination in his eyes, and the way he carried himself with calm assurance. There was something about him that made her feel safe, a comfort she hadn't known in a long time. Evenings were their favorite time of day. After the chores were done, they would sit by the fire, the cabin warm and filled with the soft glow of the flames. Clara would hum quietly while preparing supper, and Jacob would listen, the sound soothing him in a way he hadn't realized he needed. Sometimes they would talk about trivial things, the weather, the animals, the small victories of the day, but other times they would sit in silence, content to simply share the same space. One particularly quiet evening, Clara asked Jacob about the land around them. "How did you come to live here?" she inquired. Jacob paused, leaning back in his chair, and looked out the window at the fading light. "My parents raised me here," he began. "When they passed, I stayed. The land, it's my home. It's hard, but it's honest work." "It teaches you a lot about yourself." Clara nodded, understanding in a way that surprised her. "I think I understand. Life here, it's demanding, but it also makes you feel alive." Jacob looked at her and saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't just surviving, she was learning, adapting, and growing stronger every day. He felt a quiet admiration for her resilience, though he kept his feelings hidden beneath his calm demeanor. As the weeks passed, small moments of connection began to emerge. Clara would laugh at Jacob's dry humor, a sound that made him smile despite himself. Jacob would notice the careful way she carried out her tasks, the gentle touch she had with the animals, and the thoughtfulness she brought into their shared space. There was an unspoken understanding growing between them, a bond formed through shared labor and quiet companionship. One morning, a storm rolled in, suddenly dark clouds covering the sky and the wind whipping across the prairie. Jacob and Clara rushed to secure the animals and bring in extra firewood. Clara carried buckets of water and tied down supplies, her hands steady despite the chaos. Jacob watched her, impressed by her courage and calmness under pressure. When the storm finally passed, the cabin was safe, and the animals were unharmed. They both stood outside, catching their breath, and watched the clouds break to reveal a rainbow stretching across the horizon. Clara looked at Jacob, a smile on her face, and he felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt before. "You handled that well," Jacob said quietly. Clara shrugged, trying to appear modest. "We did it together," she replied. It was true. They had faced the storm as a team, relying on each other's strengths and skills. That shared experience brought them closer, building trust and a sense of partnership. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. Clara learned to prepare hearty meals with whatever ingredients they had, baking bread and cooking stews that filled the cabin with comforting aromas. Jacob, in turn, began to open up more, sharing stories of his youth, of the struggles and joys of living on the prairie, and of the few friends he had lost touch with over the years. One day, while gathering eggs from the coop, Clara slipped and nearly fell, but Jacob caught her just in time. They laughed at the close call, and for a moment their eyes met, lingering longer than usual. Both felt a flutter of emotion, though neither spoke of it. There was a growing awareness between them that what they felt was more than friendship, though they were still cautious, unsure how to name it. Winter brought its own challenges. The days grew shorter, the nights longer and colder. Snow covered the prairie in a thick blanket, making chores more difficult and travel nearly impossible. Jacob and Clara relied on each other more than ever, sharing the warmth of the fire and the small comforts of their cabin. They would sit together, reading from a tattered book or simply talking quietly, the sound of the wind outside a constant reminder of the harsh world beyond their walls. During one particularly harsh snowstorm, Jacob injured his leg while tending to the cattle. Clara took charge, carefully tending to his injury, cleaning the wound, and helping him move around the cabin. She worked with a skill and confidence that surprised him, and he realized just how capable she had become. "Thank you," he said one evening as she prepared a simple meal for them both. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Clara smiled softly, a warmth in her eyes. You would have managed, but I'm glad I could help. We make a good team, don't we?" Jacob nodded, feeling the truth in her words. They had learned to rely on each other, to trust each other, and to share the burdens of life. In those quiet moments, a deep bond had formed, one that went beyond words or gestures. Spring finally arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the prairie. Flowers bloomed, the cattle grazed on fresh grass, and the days grew warmer. Jacob and Clara spent long hours outside, tending the land and enjoying the beauty around them. The hard work continued, but there was a sense of joy and fulfillment in their shared labor. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie, Clara spoke softly. "Jacob, I never imagined life could be like this. It's hard, yes, but it's good. I feel safe and I feel happy." Jacob looked at her, a feeling he could no longer ignore welling up inside him. "Clara," he said quietly, "I feel the same way. I didn't expect this, but I'm glad it happened. I'm glad you're here." Clara smiled, a gentle warmth spreading through her chest. She realized that the cabin, the prairie, and the quiet life they shared had brought them together in ways neither could have anticipated. Their connection was no longer just a matter of circumstance. It was real, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. As the stars appeared in the night sky, they sat together in companionable silence, each feeling the quiet thrill of something new and promising. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, a reminder of the vast world outside, but inside the cabin, warmth, safety, and the beginnings of love were taking root. Jacob knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew that with Clara by his side, they could face anything. And Clara, too, realized that the unexpected twist of fate that had brought her to this cabin had led her to a place she could finally call home. In those days, filled with work, small joys, and growing understanding, Jacob and Clara discovered that true connection was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It was about being present, being kind, and slowly learning to trust and care for another person. And with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger, a quiet promise of love and partnership forming in the heart of the prairie. As the seasons changed, the prairie began to show the first hints of winter. The wind grew colder, sharper, and the days shorter. Jacob and Clara had grown accustomed to life together, but the harshness of the coming months would test them in ways they had never imagined. It began with the cattle. A sudden drop in temperature brought frost to the grass, and Jacob realized that some of the animals were weaker than before. He worked tirelessly to ensure they had enough food and shelter. Clara followed closely, helping to bring in hay, mend broken fences, and guide the cattle to safer pastures. She had become skilled in the routines of prairie life, her movements confident and precise, and Jacob admired her determination quietly, though he rarely spoke it aloud. One evening while checking the barn, Jacob slipped on the frozen ground and injured his leg. Pain shot through him, sharp and sudden, and he fell heavily. Clara rushed to his side, fear flashing in her eyes. She helped him to the cabin, supporting him carefully as they walked. The small fire crackled in the hearth, and the warmth of the cabin seemed almost miraculous after the cold outside. "You're hurt," Clara said, her voice steady despite her worry. "We need to get this cleaned and bandaged." Jacob tried to brush it off, but Clara's determined gaze stopped him. "I can do this," she insisted. She worked carefully, cleaning the wound and wrapping it with cloths they had prepared for emergencies. Her hands were gentle but sure, and Jacob felt a strange comfort in her care. Over the next days, Clara took charge of the cabin and chores, making sure everything ran smoothly while Jacob rested. She fed the animals, chopped wood, and kept the fire burning. She even prepared meals, carefully balancing nutrition and warmth, ensuring he had strength to recover. Jacob was impressed by her resilience and capability. He realized that Clara was no longer just a guest in his cabin. She was his partner in life, someone he could rely on without question. During the long winter nights, they spent hours talking by the fire. Clara shared stories of her childhood, of her dreams and fears, and the family she had left behind. Jacob spoke more freely than he had before, recounting memories of his parents, the lessons he had learned from the land, and the hardships of surviving alone on the prairie. Each story, each shared memory brought them closer. One particularly quiet night as snow fell gently outside, Clara looked at Jacob and asked, "Do you ever feel lonely even with people around?" Jacob thought for a moment. "I used to," he said softly. But now I think I understand that loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about not having someone who truly sees you. And I think I'm starting to feel seen." Clara felt her heart stir at his words. She realized that she, too, felt a deep connection with him, a sense of being understood in a way she had never experienced. Their bond was growing stronger, rooted not just in shared work but in mutual respect and trust. As winter deepened, life on the prairie became more challenging. Blizzards swept across the land and supplies ran low. Jacob and Clara worked tirelessly, often waking before dawn and continuing long after dusk. Yet, despite the hardships, there was a sense of accomplishment and unity. They faced every challenge together, learning to anticipate each other's needs and support one another in small and meaningful ways. One day, Jacob received word from the town that a trader would be passing by in a few days with supplies. He was grateful for the news, but it also reminded him how isolated they had been. Clara noticed the concern on his face and offered reassurance. "We've managed this long," she said. "A few more days won't change that." The arrival of the trader brought a brief sense of excitement. Fresh bread, sugar, and cloth were exchanged for the few goods Jacob had to trade. Clara eagerly helped with the purchases, choosing items that would make their cabin more comfortable. She selected a small quilt for the bed and some candles, things that would bring warmth and light during the long nights. Jacob watched her, appreciating how she brought comfort and care into every corner of their home. Despite the work and the challenges, moments of joy began to appear. They would sit by the fire after a long day, drinking tea and laughing quietly at shared memories or small jokes. Clara had a habit of humming softly while working, and Jacob found himself listening intently, the sound comforting and familiar. Sometimes they would step outside together in the cold, watching the snow fall and marveling at the beauty of the winter landscape. As the days passed, Jacob began to notice a change within himself. He found himself thinking about Clara when she was away, worrying for her safety and hoping she was warm and comfortable. He began to appreciate the little things she did, how she organized the cabin, how she handled the animals, how she smiled when she was pleased with a task completed well. These thoughts brought a warmth to his heart he had not known before. Clara, too, realized that her feelings were deepening. She had come to the prairie feeling lost and abandoned, uncertain of her future. But Jacob's presence, his kindness, and the security he provided had made her feel safe in a way she never thought possible. She admired his strength and integrity, the quiet way he faced every challenge, and the subtle humor that sometimes escaped him. Slowly, she realized that she was falling for him. One evening, a harsh blizzard blew in suddenly, forcing them to stay inside the cabin. The wind rattled the windows, and snow piled up outside, making the world beyond their cabin seem distant and unreachable. They sat close to the fire, the warmth surrounding them, and Clara reached for Jacob's hand. I don't know how to explain this," she said softly. "But I feel like I belong here with you. Even though this wasn't how I imagined my life, I'm happy here." Jacob felt a lump in his throat. He squeezed her hand gently. "I feel the same," he admitted. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to care for someone like this. But I do, and I think I've felt it for a long time." For the first time, they allowed themselves to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing between them. It was a quiet, tender moment filled with understanding and relief. They didn't need to speak of the future or make promises. They simply knew that they had found something rare and valuable in each other. The blizzard passed, leaving the prairie blanketed in fresh snow. Jacob and Clara ventured outside, the world sparkling and quiet. They walked together, supporting each other over the icy ground, and felt a profound sense of connection, not just to each other, but to the land, to the life they had built, and to the challenges they had faced together. As winter gave way to spring, the bond between them continued to grow. The days lengthened, the snow melted, and the prairie came alive with new growth. Jacob and Clara worked side by side, tending the land, caring for the animals, and preparing for the busy season ahead. Yet amid the labor, there was always time for small joys. Sharing a meal by the fire, laughing at a playful animal, or simply sitting quietly together, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the comfort of each other's company. Through these months, they discovered a truth that neither had anticipated. True partnership was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about trust, care, and shared effort. It was about showing up for each other every day in small ways that built a deep and lasting connection. Jacob and Clara had found that in each other, and it was more valuable than either had ever imagined. By the time spring fully arrived, the prairie was vibrant and alive. Flowers bloomed, the grass grew tall and green, and the animals thrived on the abundant pastures. Jacob and Clara looked around at the world they had tended together and felt a sense of pride and fulfillment. Their bond had been tested by storms, hardship, and isolation, but it had emerged stronger and more resilient. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Clara looked at Jacob and said softly, "I think we've built something here. Something more than just a cabin or a life on the prairie. We've built a home." Jacob nodded, his heart full. "Yes," he agreed. "A home, not just in the cabin, but here together. I've never felt this before, but I know I don't want to be anywhere else." In that moment, they realized that their connection had grown into something far deeper than friendship or gratitude. They had discovered love, not sudden and dramatic, but slow, steady, and real. It was a love built on respect, shared work, trust, and the quiet understanding of each other's hearts. And as they sat together, watching the prairie glow in the last light of day, they knew that life would continue to bring challenges. But they also knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together, side by side, hearts aligned and spirits connected. The harsh prairie, the lonely cabin, and the unexpected turns of fate had led them to each other, and that was a gift neither of them would ever take for granted. Spring had fully arrived on the prairie, painting the world in shades of green and gold. The snow had melted, leaving streams of clear water flowing through the land, and wildflowers began to bloom across the fields. Birds sang from the trees, and the air was warm and fresh. Jacob and Clara stood together on the porch of the cabin, looking out over the land they had nurtured and cared for. It was a moment of quiet beauty, and both of them felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life they had built together. Over the months, their relationship had grown quietly and naturally. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, Jacob taking Clara in after she was abandoned, had transformed into a deep and abiding love. They had shared hardships, laughter, and quiet moments of connection. They had learned to trust each other completely, to rely on each other without hesitation, and to care for one another in ways that went beyond words. One morning, Jacob and Clara set out to tend to the cattle together. The prairie was alive with the sounds of spring, the rustle of grass, the songs of birds, and the soft lowing of the cattle. Clara had become confident and capable, moving with ease as she guided the animals and checked the fences. Jacob watched her with quiet admiration, marveling at how much she had grown since the day she first arrived at his cabin. As they worked, Clara noticed the gentle way Jacob looked at her. It was a look that carried more than just respect. It carried warmth, appreciation, and a deep, unspoken love. She felt her heart swell with emotion, realizing just how much he had become a part of her life. She knew that she loved him, not just for his strength and kindness, but for the way he made her feel safe and valued every day. After the work was done, they returned to the cabin and prepared a simple meal together. They laughed as they chopped vegetables and stirred the stew, their movements synchronized after months of working side by side. The cabin smelled of cooking, wood smoke, and the fresh spring air that drifted in through the open windows. It was a home filled with warmth, life, and love. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, Jacob and Clara sat on the porch. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, wild and free, yet their hearts were anchored in the cabin they had shared and the bond they had built. "Clara," Jacob began, his voice soft but firm, "these months with you, I never expected to feel this way. But I can't imagine my life without you. You become more than just someone I'm protecting. You've become the person I want to share my life with." Clara felt a warmth in her chest, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Jacob, I feel the same," she said quietly. "I never imagined I could feel so whole. You've made me feel safe, cared for, and loved. I don't want to be anywhere else but here with you." Jacob reached out and took her hands in his, holding them gently but firmly. "Then let's promise each other this," he said. "Let's promise to face life together, whatever comes our way. Not because we have to, but because we choose to. You and me, Clara, together." Clara smiled through tears of joy. "Yes, Jacob, together." From that moment, their love was no longer quiet or unspoken. It was real, strong, and unwavering. They continued to live their life on the prairie, working together, laughing together, and supporting one another through every challenge. The prairie was a harsh and demanding place, but their love made it feel safe, warm, and full of possibility. As the days passed, Jacob and Clara found joy in the simplest things. They planted a small garden, tending to vegetables and flowers that would feed and brighten their home. They spent long evenings sitting by the fire, sharing stories, reading aloud from the books they had collected, and dreaming together about the future. They celebrated small victories, the successful repair of a fence, a calf born healthy, a loaf of bread that turned out perfectly, and found contentment in their shared accomplishments. One day, Jacob led Clara to a quiet spot on the prairie, a place where the grass was soft and the view stretched for miles. He had prepared a small picnic, with bread, cheese, and fresh water. They sat together, watching the clouds drift across the sky and listening to the gentle sounds of the land around them. "Clara," Jacob said after a while, "I want you to know that I've never felt this way about anyone before. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've taught me patience, kindness, and what it means to truly care for someone. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, sharing everything, the work, the joys, the hardships, and the quiet moments like this." Clara took his hand and squeezed it gently. "Jacob, I feel the same. You've given me a home, a purpose, and a love I never thought I would find. I want to spend my life with you too, facing everything together just like we've been doing." They sat there for a long time, hands intertwined, hearts connected, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. The prairie seemed to glow around them, a reflection of the warmth and happiness that had grown between them. As weeks turned into months, Jacob and Clara's life together flourished. They continued to care for the land, tend to the animals, and build a home filled with love and laughter. Neighbors would occasionally visit, commenting on how well they worked together and how happy they seemed. Jacob and Clara welcomed these visits, but they cherished their private moments even more. The quiet evenings by the fire, the walks across the prairie, the simple joy of being together. One evening, after a long day of work, Jacob and Clara sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the night sky. Clara leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Do you ever think about how different life could have been?" she asked softly. Jacob nodded. "Yes," he admitted, "but I'm glad it turned out this way. Everything we've gone through, it brought us here, to this, to each other." Clara smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I wouldn't change a thing," she said. The seasons continued to change, and with each one, Jacob and Clara's love grew stronger. They faced challenges together, from harsh weather to difficult work on the land, but they always supported each other. Their bond was built not just on affection, but on shared experience, trust, and mutual respect. One spring morning after a long winter, Jacob surprised Clara with a small, handcrafted ring. It was simple, made from a piece of metal he had found and shaped himself. He held it out to her with a shy but hopeful smile. "Clara," he said, "I know we don't need formalities or grand gestures, but I want you to know that I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me here in the life we've built together?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she laughed softly through her emotion. "Yes, Jacob, yes, of course I will." They embraced, the warmth of their love surrounding them as the prairie stretched endlessly around their cabin. It was a simple life, but it was rich with meaning, filled with care, trust, and happiness. They had found in each other something rare and precious, a love that had grown slowly, steadily, and truly, rooted in shared life and genuine connection. As the sun set that evening, Jacob and Clara sat together on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts full. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling, and the prairie glowing in the soft light. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that they had found something stronger than any hardship: each other. Their story was one of unexpected beginnings, of compassion and kindness, of shared work and quiet moments, and ultimately of true love. What had started as a simple act of taking in someone in need had blossomed into a lifelong partnership, built on trust, care, and the enduring power of love. Jacob and Clara looked out over the prairie one last time that evening, feeling the vastness of the world around them, and yet, knowing that within the walls of their cabin and within the bond they shared, they had found everything they could ever need. They were home not just in the cabin but in each other's hearts, and with that, they settled in for the night, wrapped in warmth, safety, and the quiet joy of knowing that their lives, though simple, were filled with love that would last forever.